All right, and I think we'll give folks another minute or two if that works, and then we will dive in, let's say at 1:03 Eastern time. And for, I think probably 10:03 for the majority of everyone else. All right, everybody. I think we're probably in a good spot to kick things off. And just as a reminder, we are going to be recording this show, so it will be shared across our network and for folks who weren't able to make it live today. So hi to all those folks listening after the fact. But again, I'm thrilled to welcome all of our audience attendees, as well as our friends from Affinity, Backstretch, and VanHack onto this webinar. So to kick things off, I'm going to give a quick little bit of background on Boast before I hand it off to my colleague Anastasia, who is the real brains behind this strategy session for Boast. So as I had mentioned before, I am Paul Davenport, and I am our head of content for Boast. At Boast, our vision is to accelerate innovation across the world by helping startups unlock the true potential of their R&D. So traditionally, this has involved helping teams gain access to non-dilutive funding, as well as R&D tax credits from both the US and Canadian governments. But what we really offer is so much more, as we enable startup teams to sync their key project tracking, financial, and payroll systems into a single platform. From there, we can actively help teams tie specific R&D activities to both expenses and outcomes. This significantly streamlines the process for identifying what qualifies for tax credits and ultimately maximizing those claims, while also giving teams access to an R&D system of intelligence to help them better allocate resources, apply for funding, and extend their runway. So again, in my role, I help lead the creation of thought leadership content for the team here at Boast, which includes hosting our What the Tech podcast, which I will share a link to after the show, and helping moderate webinars with partners like our friends here today. So that said, I'm thrilled to be here with Ilya, Danielle, Matthew, and Anastasia, and hope we can deliver some impactful findings for all the folks in attendance. But before we kick it off to the rest of the team, Anastasia, could you give a brief intro?
Hi, thanks, Paul. Hi, everybody. I'm Anastasia. I'm the head of partnerships here at Bose. Essentially, what I do is I build a relationship with the ecosystem, but I also talk to you on a regular basis. In the previous life, I was running an accelerator. I was a growth advisor, and I have 2 M&As under my belt. One thing that came up often, kind of like especially these days, is around non-dilutive financing, capital strategy. How do I do X? So the way we see things at Bose, essentially, we're just one pillar of non-dilutive funding, which is like tax credits, but there is like loans, there is grants, and there is a lot of different things. But as an extension of that, especially in the last 12 months, I want to say, a lot of founders have been asking, how do we balance this out? Like, we need to actually deliver and grow, but at the same time, dollars are stretched. So I kind of figured, as part of the conversation, kind of like bringing this outside of usual coffees, chats, and then dinners, we basically pull in the experts on the recruitment side of things to talk about trends and to talk about kind of like how to leverage government dollars or kind of like non-dilutive dollars as well. And that's why we have Matthew, Denise, and Ilya here. Ilya in particular wears 2 hats from the recruitment side, but also as a founder.
Yeah, I can jump into the Affinity intro here. So my name is Denise. I'm an account manager at Affinity. We were founded in 2014 in Vancouver, and we now have clients across North America. So we recruit both locally and internationally for permanent employees and contractors. Primarily, we focus within the tech space. That's our niche. But we do also support roles within sales, marketing, finance. We grew quite quickly. So like a lot of you, we've had to figure out how to grow sustainably and efficiently. I personally do a lot of work with startups. We're now over 400 people ourselves. We do a lot of work with startups, so the resource planning is so important at that stage. I'm really excited to chat about it.
Hello, everybody. My name is Matt. I started this company Backstretch 12 years ago because I started in third-party agency space. Then I took a tech company from 5 to 200 people on the inside, and the goal was all around how do you be the bridge and solve long-term hiring for growth tech companies. And I think there's some value in bringing this today. On this slide, you're just going to see we focus seed to Series B, or we like it because we're 50-70% less than traditional agencies, turnaround time 14 days, team has 10,000 plus interviews. Our biggest case today we always talk about is Certain, where we did 194 hires for them in 19 months. And that's my piece.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Ilya. I'm the CEO and co-founder at VanHack. We are a tech recruiting and relocation company specializing in helping bring tech talent to Canada from around the world. We've done around over 2,000 hires at around 1,000 customers, some of which you can see here. And yeah, we're always looking to help companies with their talent needs.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. So before we dive into the real panel conversation, I did want to give a little bit of a primer on the different stages of the startup lifecycle, as we'll be discussing them in this conversation. So again, the focus for today is going to zero in on the funding strategies in place to support growth phase startups. But a lot of what we'll be discussing is relevant for startups traveling from any phase of the lifecycle to the next. So it all starts off with that idea and concept. The first phase is where you identify the problem you're looking to solve and you match it to a solution. The next phase is when you start pulling together the personalities and talent you want to help get your idea off the ground. Next is the phase where you've got your founding team in place and the brain power you need to start creating your MVP solution. The prototype phase is steeped with R&D as you test hypotheses and tweak processes to refine a product that really solves key problems. So next, you're at the stage 4, launch beta phase, once your product has been developed and you've turned those test cases into customers. This starts to fold over into the users phase, where you'll be refining your product market fit, optimizing your funnel, and also molding your channel product fit. It's at the revenue phase that your product is clicking with users. As they pay for your tools or services, this revenue starts playing a role in your capital strategy. You can also start expanding your team outside of your core product development shop to capture that momentum and grow your go-to-market team. Then your startup has entered that growth phase when you are starting to produce higher revenue, while new challenges that could ultimately present opportunities for expansion come about. This is where we'll probably go a little longer today. But then once your startup has evolved into a revenue generating machine, it's considered an established business and you're in full-blown profitability phase. That is, you're raising funding based on actual performance and not just market hyper potential. And you might even be exploring either an IPO, if not an acquisition. And that's where many founders reach the exit phase, which, while it's not necessarily pictured here, is more or less when founders have the opportunity to cash out of their venture if the conditions make sense. But as folks in this room know well, a growth stage company startup is a company that has achieved some level of success in their market and is now focused on scaling to unlock even greater levels of growth. But at this stage, you typically already have a strong management team in place, a proven business model, and maybe even a track record of revenue and profitability. That doesn't necessarily mean things are locked in for growth. Of course, naturally, growth comes with growing pains. So you may see some churn in both employees and customers as the business evolves into its next state. So it's critical then that you're weighing the challenges you face alongside the opportunities that these challenges can unlock. So some of these challenges include hiring and retaining top talent, why we're here today. As a startup scales, it can be difficult to attract and retain the best employees. This is especially true in a competitive industry where there is a lot of demand. Managing cash flow is another big one. Rapid growth can put a strain on your startup's cash flow. This can be especially challenging if the company is not yet generating enough revenue to cover all of its costs, which is pretty par for the course. Scaling operations is another big one. A startup needs to have the systems and processes in place to support its growth. This can be a challenge for companies that are used to operating on a smaller scale. And managing risk, of course. As companies grow, it becomes more exposed to risks like competition, regulation, and even market fluctuations. We'll cover all those risks in the conversation today, but you need to be aware of them in the first place and have plans in place to manage them. So before we move on to the next one, we also want to talk about some of the opportunities. At the growth phase, you can start expanding into new markets. If you've achieved success in one market, you can often leverage this to expand and look at the white space and explore some complementary solutions. Part and parcel with this is developing new products or services. This can help your company continue to grow its revenue while tapping into those new markets you identified previously. there's also new opportunities for raising additional funding, as you're likely in a better position to raise funding from investors because of all the work that you've demonstrated you've been able to do as a business owner. And to that end, you may eventually want to explore going public, but I think that's a little farther down the line than we want to go for today's conversation. But I just talked a lot, and we do not want to make assumptions. So if the folks in the room here could all pull out their phones, I would like to conduct a little poll here. So let me get this set up. Apologies for the technical difficulties, folks. All right, and I am going to activate the poll, but I invite even the founders on the panel to contribute here. What are your top 3 R&D areas where you're finding the most challenging heading into 2024? We'll give it a minute, and again, we understand that it might not be something that people even have their heads wrapped around quite yet, but we'll touch on all of these in some capacity, whether or not it's an acute problem today. Okay. Gonna be honest, these are the 3 I was hoping we were gonna see, so that is fantastic. Oh, I know. Funding, okay. All right, so funding is by far the biggest concern or challenge going into things today. All right. We'll move on to the next question. Now, what are your top 3 budget concerns heading into 2024? This obviously ties into the funding of it all, but where specifically can we zero in to help give you some advice in this webinar? Right. Awesome. And I think there's lots of ways to slice and dice this too. Insufficient budget / headcount can be tackled in many different ways, but the reason you get to that point too also isn't one-to-one across any industry. So we can definitely go into some examples and specifics on that front. All right. Now, with those in place, we will switch back to our slide deck, and I'd like to kick off a little bit of a panel discussion based on some of the findings there. So let me pull this out, but just to remind everybody, for the top 3 R&D areas you find the most challenging heading into 2024, funding, execution, and engineering, and we're really the top 2, and all the other ones came in as considerations as well. ROI management, project management, planning and forecasting, hiring and staffing. So Anastasia, I guess I'd love to kick it over to you, my buddy here at Boast. What does all of this tell you, especially with that funding being the 75% one for almost everybody in here?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is essentially everybody's thinking about their capital strategy and then their growth and then how to balance the two. For a lot of like growth stage companies, especially as you're thinking about the unit of economics a little bit more, you start thinking about kind of like the output per person, the kind of level of person that you need to hire. Maybe instead of like a manager, you might need an IC, or instead of an IC, you might need a director. I think these are the kind of questions that you need to be asking your team and looking at the team holistically instead of kind of like one side versus the other. I would actually encourage founders, instead of thinking we only have a budget of X to hire and then hire seniority based on that budget, I would actually kind of like look at it from the perspective of what does the business need and what do we currently have in place. The one fallacy that I've seen a lot of first-time founders and a lot of first-time entrepreneurs kind of like going into scaling, and I would love like for our panelists to like chime in as well, is hiring based on the seniority they think they need to or the budget versus the makeup of the team. When your funding is stretched, this is an opportunity for your manager to act at the level and kind of like show up and become a director, or for your VP to go down back to like director level or manager level and actually get in the trenches. It's a startup. They're joining a startup. They know what it means. So it's more so like harnessing that power and then really like relying on your team to fill the gap when it can be filled with the current talent before thinking about kind of like hiring elsewhere. I think that would be like the key point that I would highlight for a lot of founders. And then when you think about kind of like what you need, once you've had this like picture of, you know what, this person can level up, this person can actually jump down and help kind of like the others at this level, then you're left with the true gap in your talent pool. That's when you kind of want to start thinking about what does the profile look like. Once you have that and then you have the budget, then you start thinking about all of the different funding sources that will help you hire for that person. So that would be kind of like my tidbit like for this particular topic. But we'd love to hear from others.
Absolutely. And Anastasia, I think you also touched a little bit too on like the project management. That can help you kill two birds with one stone when you kind of rethink the employees that you have in that funding conversation. Rest of the panelists, Denise, I'm looking at you. I'd love to know your thoughts about some of the findings here. Again, funding's number one, but it's one of many challenges that folks are facing today. What were your takes about that poll that we had conducted?
Yeah, I would say just jumping on Anastasia's points a little bit, like when people are joining a startup, they tend to do it partially for the culture, right? So we find candidates are very willing to jump in where it's needed, and finding the right fit includes potentially wearing many hats, especially when funding is tight, and really trying to make your funding go as far as it can. So that would be the main thing I thought of based on her points.
Fantastic. All right, Matthew, I'm going to look at you next. Any
Yeah.
thoughts there?
Well, okay. So what I hear is what everyone's saying is funding, funding, funding. So I would say if you are in a growth space and you're seeking funding, are you aware of what the people that have access to money are looking for in today's market, not what it was, you know, a year and a half or 2 years ago, even 6 months ago. So as a company trying to raise funds in a tighter market, one thing I would say is have in your pitch deck how you plan to grow. So 2 years ago, you know, I do some mentorship with the E at UBC program where it's the incubator at UBC where companies are coming through. We also sponsor with DMZ out of Toronto and also Foresight in Calgary. So we see a lot of companies growing and a lot of companies at the stage. And the thing is some people are using pitch decks from, you know, 2022, which is fine, which is, you know, product fit, etc. But companies really care now how you're spending every dollar. So yes, funding's an issue, but are you actually tapping into what the people with the money need and want today? So tap into more how you're using each dollar, your revenue path, and on a hiring front, I think a pitch deck slide is very valuable to talk about how you plan to ramp up. Why do I say that? It's because they want to know your intelligence around hiring today. They didn't really care about, people did care 2 years ago, but they care a lot more now. And if your plan is, oh yeah, we're just going to hire, then your access to funding will diminish. But if you actually have a plan and a roadmap and a partner to ensure that you get there, your chance of accessing to funds is a lot higher. And if you look at all the LinkedIn polls and everything, hiring is always in the top 3 pain points for any growth startup in any market. So if you're not addressing top 1, 2, and 3 in your pitch deck, or not actually talking those discussions with people with the money, you're kind of hurting yourself. One thing we've seen is actually companies wanting to include us on their pitch decks. I think that's very interesting. So what you're showing is hey, we've got a product market fix. Here's our path. Here's our strategy of ramping up. And I think that's where you kind of need to be thinking if you're trying to grow a company in today's market. Really speak to where the audience is at today and stop pitching like it was 2 years ago.
I love that.
That's a very good point. And Paul, if you don't mind me jumping in real quick, I think kind of like the pitch deck example is like a really real thing. One thing that I've started noticing, like founders who are investor savvy or kind of like fundraising savvy in a way, the one metric they always include is actually average revenue per employee. I think kind of like that's the one metric that in a party round people don't really think about, but like once you actually start getting to the growth phase and then you care about the unit of economics, actually sharing what your current like average revenue per employee, and then with every new hire, what the incremental gain or maybe kind of decrease like would be and why, and being able to reason like around that number is actually a very key skill set kind of like in actually securing extra funding if it's like for talent. The other point kind of like I was gonna bring up too is when it comes to kind of like hiring as well, some of the founders that I really enjoyed working with and kind of like having conversations with, they shared that in their pitch deck, they actually laid out the key milestones they need to hit before they hire X. And once this person is hired, which milestones they're gonna hit. So this is not just kind of like part of the hiring, like job posting. In 90 days, you'll be doing X, Y, and Z, but it's like genuinely, once we hit this, and this revenue or this conversion rate or this product roadmap or this is out the door, then we're going to hire the next incremental role at about like this time of the year. That shows kind of, as Matthew was saying, that there is a very thoughtful process around the hiring and the recruitment side of things that is not just throwing bodies at a problem.
I love that. Anastasia, you put that into a good context around talent too, and retaining talent and acquiring talent. I was going to add in we've been having conversations with our friends at SaaScan, for instance, and just the metrics that investors are looking for. To Matthew's point about it no longer being 2022, they've changed significantly. They are vetting companies differently. They want something different from their portfolio. The new normal is now roughly 18 to 24-month runway, according to the SaaScan research. Obviously, that's not going to be one-to-one everywhere. That's a best case scenario, but that's really what they're looking for going forward. Before we move on to some of the specific topics, Ilya, I want to throw it to you. Any immediate responses to some of those poll results that we were just sharing?
Yeah, I think the biggest or the best thing to do is try and build a business that doesn't rely on funding or any outside capital other than, Shred and grants that are pretty straightforward to get. So that would be my biggest takeaway is just build a business or do everything you can to prove out the idea, get customers, and grow with that funding or their revenue before raising money, especially these days. Raising money on an idea or without any actual revenue, it's pretty hard.
Awesome points. All right, like I mentioned, we do have some specific topics that are all very relevant to those challenges that I'd love for the panel to start discussing, but I'll kick this off with kind of the prompt of what are some of the budgetary constraints that are most prevalent, I guess, at the growth stage for startups who are trying to achieve success in today's market? I'd love if we could discuss this again, specifically to the realities of 2024, specifically March 13th, 2024, and through the lens of staffing and through talent acquisition and maximizing your talent and maximizing your runway while minimizing costs. Anastasia, I'd love to throw it over to you again to kick off.
I think kind of like piggybacking on what I've already shared when it comes to, again, like, are you hiring IC? Are you hiring someone strategic? Can you hire a combination of both, or like people who can adapt in both scenarios? Further to that, like once you actually know that gap that kind of like that you actually need, like in your team, is looking at what are the other funding options that you can actually finance this hire with. Ilya touched on kind of really good point that I absolutely 100% agree that the best capital source is still revenue. But if that's not there to support kind of your growth plan, at least not yet, eventually it will, because obviously you're hiring these people to grow. Shred is like one way kind of like to do it. There is Shred financing. So when you have kind of like this product development team, so that's your product engineering team, generally speaking, their salaries, you can actually get a refund from the Canadian government. That's like what we call Shred for those of you who are not familiar. But it's typically like takes longer. It's just like your own personal tax refund. You have to wait until the end of the fiscal year, you submit, and then you get the money back. What companies kind of like have started providing for founders in the ecosystem is essentially shred financing. With BOS specifically, like with us, if you are claiming shred kind of like with BOS, essentially because we know how much you're going to get back at the end of the year, we're able to advance you that money. So what that allows you to do is you can actually hire either your GTM hire, so basically to generate more revenue, or more of your technical hire, so basically to build the product and go out the door like faster. And that essentially helps you close that gap to actually hire kind of this person maybe like 6 months earlier versus 6 months later, because you have the money up front. So that would be one way. Another thing that I would kind of like recommend as well is actually MyTax. So there is kind of like this one organization across Canada. Essentially what they do is they subsidize hire for essentially students or like postgrads that are in their program. They have AI engineers, ML engineers, they have MBAs kind of like building out GTM strategy and market development studies. So this is like another way to leverage like that sort of financial resources to help you hire if your budget doesn't actually meet what you need right now.
I love that. I'd love to open it up to the rest of you too. Denise, I'm looking at you again. If you could maybe just tell us about some of the budgetary constraints that clients you've worked with experience and that are chronic, maybe even just some of the impact of not having the budget or headcount you need to execute on your growth goals.
Yeah, I would say one thing that we're focusing on a little bit is trying to figure out if you don't have the budget that you necessarily want to grow your headcount, also looking at getting a bit creative on what total comp looks like. So that's things, there's a lot of people for different stages in life, they're looking for different things. So whether that's more of a flexible work environment, 35-hour work week, stock options, things that are not going to hit your regular operational costs. So I find with that, it's a really good way to get a little bit flexible. You get the candidates you want that are a good culture fit. They really believe in what you're doing, and it doesn't cost you quite as much to the bottom line.
I would also love to know too, Matthew, what are some of the constraints that people are feeling and maybe some solutions that you've offered in the past to either, again, nothing's a silver bullet, but to help them get around the kind of persistent challenges that you face at the growth phase, as well as the ones that are acute to our current market?
Yeah, okay, awesome question. I think that there's always going to be constraints. Okay, so even if things were 2 years ago and you got a whole bunch of funding, you're still going to be in constraints. To that moment, you'll be in constraints today. So I echo what Ilya was saying in terms of, don't even, if you can create this, not even worry about funding, that's awesome. So right on. But if you do need that, and you're talking about current constraints, my only question would be is to a company in growth right now is, what's the plan? So we don't want to talk about your constraints, and candidates don't want to talk about your constraints. That's your issues, and your job as the owner or founder is to solve those things. What the candidates and what people who are joining, and even people on your team right now want to know is, what's your plan? What are we doing? What are we doing today to tackle what's happening? So constraints aside, it kind of goes to that Elon Musk quote, which is being or a founder is like staring into the abyss and eating glass. That's your responsibility. And what that means is staring into the abyss is your job is to look forward, understand the issues, understand the good, understand what is the constraints today. And the eating glass part is your job is to go solve that. So I think constraints are reality always in every market. So don't use that as a reason to not have a plan. So dive into it, have a plan, share your plan, and make your plan adaptable and moldable. So when things might change in a few weeks, that's okay. But that's, I just don't like the idea of saying today is constraints. 2 years ago was constraints. It'll happen in 2 years from now. So enjoy the constraints, get dirty with them, face them, talk to your team about them. Hey, what do you want to do to solve this? How are we going to tackle this? And it's not going to get better or worse. It's just going to change based on how you feel and your perspective. So, it's okay to have constraints. Get in there, get dirty, and just enjoy the process and have a plan. And if you don't have a plan, that's on you. So that's my input.
I like it. Get cozy with your constraints and build a plan around it. Don't try to ignore them or pretend they're not there. And I like how you frame that too about 2 years ago. Those constraints kind of become your new normal. If you don't face them, you're just prolonging the inevitable. Ilya, I know a lot of the responses that we had for this premise spun out of your response from the previous question, but I'd love to know too, in the current landscape and the folks that you're working with today over at VanHack, how are they working with some of their more acute, now I'm afraid to say constraints, but challenges in the current market?
Well, I mean, the current market's pretty tough, right? So we're seeing just generally companies restructuring, looking for new ways of growth, saving money, etc. So that's really what we're seeing right now.
I know we touched on this next point about the specific programs, I think, and the specific options out there for folks to tap into, again, non-dilutive funding, but just programs that will help them get the resources they need to achieve the growth that they would eventually like to get. So we started talking about Shred. I think that folks in this room are hopefully familiar with that. It's a lot of what we do here at Boast, but there are other programs, other strategies, and even just other methods of getting the funding that you need. And it doesn't necessarily all have to be equity, non-equity. Anastasia, could you unpack a little bit about this for us? I know we did do a little bit of a talk about what Boast does in regards to Shred, but how can teams really maximize this program to their benefit?
Oh, absolutely. Kind of like when it comes to, I think kind of like one of the biggest constraints, as Matthew was saying, concerns is always there. The question is, are you hiring for GTM versus are you hiring builders kind of to build the product and things like that? I think that like once you know all the different pieces that you can leverage in order to kind of like hiring for these things, and you can start kind of like prioritizing which one should be better. Again, going back to the strategy, this hire will bring X, Y, and Z versus that hire. For product and engineering specifically, I always kind of recommend companies to look into like one, first and foremost, IRAP. Like if you haven't already, I know that as a growth stage company, that's probably a little bit harder because like you're essentially slightly de-risk. But it's still there. If you have a good relationship with your IRAP ITA, please kind of like reach out, talk to them, see if they can actually work with you in some ways or another. The second one is always Shred and tax credit, which is what we talk about. So as a good kind of like example, I would say, let's say like your typical, just for the sake of easy math, because I'm not that good at math, let's say your typical like backend engineer is 100K a year. If you're in BC, you're likely, and then if this engineer is just like coding and building something new, you're looking at about $64,000 back at the end of the year. From Shred, kind of like, again, provided that he's actually just doing like building instead of like management side of things. And when you start looking at kind of like $64,000 that you get maybe like when you file your taxes, what if you can get incrementally like 15,000 of that? With $15,000, can you hire one more junior engineer or one kind of like maybe ops person like every month? You just kind of like as an extra bonus kind of like to your budget to like afford hiring these people. So that's kind of like some of the financial instruments that I would put in place in order to kind of like make hiring a little bit easier. I mentioned MyTax kind of like a little bit earlier. So that's MITACS. We can introduce these guys to you, like if that's kind of like what you want to explore. They will be able to like usually subsidize about 50% of the salary as well. So that's kind of like that option is there. For anything on the GTM side of things, if you haven't already, I highly recommend Googling the CAN export, so Canadian export program. So essentially what that helps you is if you're selling in the States, if you're selling like basically outside in Canada in general, there is like additional budget for you that you can compete with in order to like basically maybe reallocate some of your marketing budget into like a hiring budget. I think it comes down to, do you know like what the different financial instruments and options that are available to you are, and how can you be kind of like creative in doing these things? Once you start working with someone like Matthew, like Denise, like Ilya, they're also familiar because they hear their clients actually like hearing these things like in conversation. So I would leverage them and ask them questions. Hey, do you know anything that I can potentially tap into? The other underutilized part of this as well, if you have someone in your network who's a fractional CFO or like a financial advisor for a company specifically, talk to them, because chances are they've seen in their lifetime different scenarios in which like people stretch the dollar. And then this is kind of like one of the ways to stretch that dollar.
I love that. Actually, this is a little bit of a tangent, but Denise, I kind of want to go back to something that you had mentioned in the last question around going outside of salary, for instance, and attracting new talent, like stock option, RSU. Are these all still compelling ways to get folks to maybe join your startup, embrace that lifestyle, and not stretch your startup's resources too thin? Is that something people are trying today? Could you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's, like I said, it's all, I like to encourage people to get a little bit creative on it. So stock options is a really great way to get candidates invested in what they're building. Not only that, when you have them invest over a longer term, it really helps you to retain that talent as well, because they're so important, especially in that growth phase. You want people to stick around and be with you on that mission. So that I find tends to be a pretty good lure for people. They really find that beneficial. And then things like knowing where you can be flexible as well. A lot of us are in Vancouver. Vancouver is expensive. So even that ability, if you can hire remote, you can hire certain roles remotely. If you find someone in Edmonton, likely going to be quite a bit cheaper compared to Vancouver. So just knowing where you can be flexible and what your company is offering from a value proposition. There's a lot of people that get very excited about what your company is building. And I think just being able to translate that to the market is important. And then obviously, as Anastasia mentioned, taking advantage of all of the grants you can, all of the shred credit opportunities, and really making sure you're leveraging that and have the knowledge around it.
Denise, I'm actually curious, kind of now that you mentioned it in terms of like remote, and then like as an extension of that, I've heard one company in particular, I think kind of like those of you in Vancouver know, that's doing like company-wide like 4-day week, but initially just to avoid layoffs, like at the beginning of COVID, because they didn't know what life was gonna look like, and they just continued on. Have you seen that trends like picking up anywhere else, like 4-day work week, or maybe instead of an option, they issue RSU and things like that?
I saw actually a client of mine last year did it through the summer. So they did 4-day work weeks for 3 or 4 months throughout the summer, just as basically an employee perk. It didn't count against time off. And it was a way of, I think the employees I spoke with anyway on it just felt like it was a really nice extra perk of working there essentially, right? Like I think we've done away in a lot of areas, we've done away with the office environment where you're doing, lunches, drinks, things like that with your colleagues. So with so many people working behind screens, little things like that are a really good way, I think, to maintain the culture.
Yeah, I will anecdotally just speak from experience. My job before Boast, we had embraced a 4-day work week. It went very well. The company was then acquired. I'm not going to say that's all because we were so productive during those 4 days, but I can tell you personally, I really appreciated just that flexibility, and it definitely kept me there longer than I might have been otherwise. So that's awesome. Matthew, I'd love to know too, if you have any thoughts on this one too, any cost-effective approaches to recruitment. I know translating that to the market and translating the different ways that you are being savvy as a both employer and just in terms of making your capital strategy work for you. That's a big thing that you have talked about today, especially as it relates to pitch books and all of that. Could you maybe expand on that for this topic?
Yeah, I think people try to solve this by, carrots or structures, but I would just say that may help, but I would say is just have a genuine conversation with the candidate you really enjoy and you want to move forward with, and just learn what's important to them. You might spend 3 months implementing a stock plan, but the reality is that may not be important to people. Like I remember so I've been doing hiring for 20 years. I remember having this one conversation where I was kind of shocked. I was younger and I was pitching the role, and I was saying, hey, this is the role. this is a situation, awesome, because they're giving so much of this stock, blah, blah, blah to you. And he's just like, I have no interest in that. He's like, I need, if we're going to move forward here, just give me more salary. And I was like, I was younger and I was kind of like, not offended, but like thrown back because it was new for me. I was like, well, that's interesting. Like, what's going on with this guy? And what I've learned is after 20 years and ramping up tech companies is a lot of mid to senior people don't want stock options because they've been through it. They've gone through that carrot dangle stick and they're sick of it and they have a family. So yeah, some people may care about that, but if that's your solution to everybody, I would say is make it more individual, have genuine and honest chats with people. And what we've done is we've helped companies create compensation packages that are options. And I don't mean options like, oh, you will get options to something, meaning, hey, let's create an A, B, and C plan, or let's create things we can move in and move out to help people kind of get what they need today. Because if they're leaving where they're currently at, or they're unemployed, you can talk to them about, hey, what was good, what was bad. And if you can show them you listen to them at that stage, what you're saying is hey, we're reflecting who we are in our culture today by being flexible and honest with you. That's my input in terms of when you're looking at it from a cost savings perspective. Is you'll be surprised what people say when you ask them, hey, what do you want to see in a plan? And I think you will inevitably get cost savings through that, but most importantly is you'll actually get it more alignment and more genuine chats with people at the beginning, which is super nice because now you actually look at them as a person, not just as a candidate, and they start looking at you as a person, and that's kind of nice. Because by the way, you're gonna spend a lot of time with that person when you do bring them on, and you should probably start that relationship building early. So that's my input.
I like that. And I think you touched on a good point too about communicating the value that these non-salary, not perks, but maybe just carrots, to use a bad analogy in this case, actually mean, like what the value they're going to get out of that, making sure that that's clear. And again, if you're not on the same page and if they're just not interested in it, then great. You've learned about this person and their needs and what it will take to satisfy their career goals. Ilya, I'd love to throw it to you as well, just to see folks that you're working with in your network, how this has worked for you on the front lines.
Yeah, I think when you're hiring someone, there's all these things you can do. Like I really like what Matt just said about figuring out what they're looking for, what's in it for them. I think another thing that's really important, especially for early stage, is just kind of showing people how they can grow with you. I know at least for us, we've had some people stay with us for quite a number of years, get promoted, and then move on to do bigger, better things at other places, and maybe get responsibility that they otherwise wouldn't have gotten or weren't ready for. And that's really something that I think is exciting, and I know that they appreciate. So when you're battling against all these other companies who are offering maybe even more competitive salary or more stable or whatever it is, I think leveraging your strengths of a gritty startup that's trying to do something impactful and really have people committed to that mission. I think that's really where you find some hidden value, and you can get people to take a chance on you and then grow in their roles. So yeah, I think that's something that what you figure out what it is that makes you different, makes you unique. What are your what is that your company stands for, and then connect that with what the employees are looking for. I think that'll really help build culture and have people do great work.
Love it. And I'm glad we brought it back to building culture to ultimately do big work. Couldn't have said it better myself. And now we did provide some examples, but I'd love to even dive into some more examples of just companies we've seen achieve growth despite the struggles that they might face in their industry or even in just the given market. I know we talked about the 4-day work week, Denise. That was great. Matthew gave a great example too about how, yeah, stock option fit isn't always the incentive that will move the needle on getting the talent you need in your organization. Are there any other stories that we want to share for the audience here that show how we can overcome some of these struggles that are acute across sectors? Anastasia, I'm looking at you again.
This is not kind of like first-hand experience. This is something that I've learned while I was moderating a panel, actually. This founder in particular, really like adopted the concept of tour of duty. So every single one kind of that reports directly to him. So basically like his first like line of direct report and then their direct reports. So basically the ones that are holding like crucial pieces of the business kind of like moving forward. And again, this is like a very later stage scale up kind of a company. The conversation that they have essentially during one-on-ones at the anniversary or like nearing the anniversary of that person is the same. Can you sign up for another tour of duty? What does that look like for you? Is that a year? Is that 2 years? What that does is kind of like one, first and foremost, any one of us who's been in startup knows that it is kind of like it is both a sprint and a marathon, and there are times that you need to kind of like to pause. And what that allows to happen is essentially as the employer, as the founder, as the manager, you know which one of your team members might need to tap out soon, and you can plan accordingly. So there is like business continuation. I love that strategy. It also kind of like opens up this honest conversation, echoing what Matthew was saying earlier, that essentially you just like talk person to person, like where are you at? So if there are any grievances, whether that's around how the comp is structured or like flexibility kind of like within their team, that's also kind of a good time kind of like to air it out. I think that could be like another way to do it. I think I haven't seen that being adopted as widely as it has been in the States, at least not in Canada. But I thought it was a very interesting concept when it comes to like saving resources, because one of the things about recruitment and talent management that some people not think about is the disruption to the business when someone leaves without you know that they were going to leave, or kind of like leaving at a crucial time. And then like now you have milestones that you need to hit, but also hiring a new person whose ramp up time is probably going to be like 3 to 4 months before they can hit the ground running. So these are the kind of things that I would encourage like people to start thinking about, and then figure out how to best adopt that to your own company and your own culture in a manner that you're comfortable with.
I love that. And again, I'm going to go around the horn one more time. Denise, we talked about the 4-day work week, but are there any other examples that you've seen within your network of just folks being able to, again, achieve this growth, achieve their success, but not run out of whether it's funding or capital or whatever they need, the resources to get their ideas into market?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, it sounds simple, but I feel like a lot of it comes down to sort of what Matthew was saying, a bit of what Anastasia was saying, just communicating what the people working with you and for you are looking for. So for some people, if that's going to be like they want a good, solid career growth map set up, taking the time to run through that with them, making sure that they're feeling like they've got a say in where your company is going, right? And it really gets them invested, whether that is through stock, whether it's through the effort they're spending, their future plans with you. And I think just keeping that communication consistent throughout, like doing those check-ins, making sure everyone is still aligned. And that it prevents you from having, as Anastasia mentioned, like I work with a lot of engineering teams. If one of the lead teams or one of the lead developers drops out, it puts them very far behind very quickly. So I think just making sure you're doing those check-ins, seeing that everyone's still aligned with your vision, and really, yeah, I would just say the clear communication and consistent communication is huge on that.
Absolutely, especially across remote teams too. You're not at arm's length, so you need to make sure you're making the time to have those conversations. I know we're a fully remote team here at Boast, and that's why I think we're so successful. Me and Anastasia are on different coasts. I do feel like she's at arm's length right now, so we're very fortunate in that respect. But Matthew, I know again too, you shared some examples here, but any more thoughts to share in terms of success strategies?
No, I just think that I just want people to really tap into the human element of today. And by the way, I have a little cold today, so that's probably why you hear this. My 2 daughters had it last week, and I thought I was over it, and then here I am. So I woke up this morning, I was like, ugh. But
You sound great.
yeah, thank you. Maybe it's more of a raspy tone, helps out. But
Oh, it helps.
the reality is everybody it's a tough time. Everyone's human. Just talk to people and figure it out. We talked a lot about strategies today, but it's not on you as a leader to figure it all out and put it all on your shoulders. First of all, it doesn't create engagement. Second of all, it's freaking exhausting. Just like the Elon Musk quote, right? It's not your job to be the only one who has to eat the glass every day. So share, talk. I think what I experienced as the owner here was when things started to turn worse for us, it was the kind of beginning of 2023. We had our best financial year ever in 2022, and we're just, everyone's just high five, and it was amazing. And then things started to go sideways. And I think my lesson was, is as an owner, I put too much on my shoulder and said, I've got this. But then I tried out things and I didn't have it. And it wasn't until sort of the beginning of this year where I really talked to the leadership team and said, hey, let's face this together. And it's funny because then I did that and everyone really pitched in. Everyone had an awesome time and we're solving things together as a team. So yeah, this is about hiring, but bigger picture is you're human, they're human, candidates are human. Everyone's in a little bit of a state of worry, concern, anxiety. So tap into it, share it, talk about it, and spread it. Because if people on your team know you're together and they can impact things, and new candidates can really understand what's happening with you, great candidates will want to dive in with you, and not so great candidates will want to ride you and just exit and leave. So, you'll find some amazing people out there, but make sure they understand what's happening in your business. Get them on your team if you want to, but are they really going to help you and drive what's this world of change in the next, everyone's talking probably the next year at least, that we're all facing this. So, do it together, and you're human, so it's okay. And share. That's my input.
I love hearing the reminder that we're all human and the overarching AI of it all that's happening in the market today that I think we're all a little afraid of in the coming year or two. That might be a little bit of what you've been alluding to, but that's a great point, Matthew. And I really like how you framed that too. We're all people. We also want to be working with people we enjoy working with, not just people who will help us get the job done or help us tackle a specific R&D challenge, for instance. We want people who are also going to make it worth getting up every day and clocking into this company and working for this company. So love to hear that. Before we dive into questions, Ilya, I want to make sure we give you a chance to give your take here on this. Any other examples of real life strategies that we could apply?
Yeah, I think there was this at least I was guilty of this mistake of when you have an issue, you need to hire a bunch of people for it. I think someone else alluded to that earlier, but I think that one thing I would definitely do going back is figure out ways to scale without having to add more people. And it is nice hiring people and have more people in the team, but I think at the same time you gotta balance that with, if you hire too many people too quickly, it takes time for everyone on board, and things start going the wrong way. So the solution to problems should be kind of hiring should be almost the last resort when you really are bursting at the seams. So yeah, I would just try and figure out ways to automate or change the process or rethink how you're doing things before adding people to the team.
Love it. I think that's a great call. Now, knowing we do have just a few minutes left, a couple questions have come through. I'm just going to ask a quick one to the room to kick things off. So when cash flow becomes tight at the growth phase, i.e. revenue is still building up, where can teams safely focus on tightening budgets without hurting momentum? That is a broad question and probably a loaded one, but I'd love to get takes from everybody in the circle here. Anastasia, I'll kick it off with you. Where can you maybe tighten your budgets if you're making a hasty decision because money's tight?
This is going to be a very lawyer answer. It depends. It depends kind of like where your company is at, what's the momentum that you're trying to reach, and what is the most impactful. I would look at what is the most impactful for the business, and then basically prioritize saving that and then decreasing everything else. one thing that actually saves a lot is travel. So if you don't actually have to travel, or key accounts, you absolutely have to. But if you don't have to, nix that out. Like that actually kind of like saves quite a bit kind of like for companies. And then I would also look at the cost of acquisition and then think I would not necessarily say like decrease the budget, but I would look at ways to optimize and then actually like squeeze more juice as much as possible. Is that optimizing the conversion rates kind of like from leads to MQL, from MQL to SQL? So basically think about kind of like different ways that you can get more out of what you're already paying. If that's still not enough, then yeah, look at kind of like decreasing the budget, but also look at how to supplement that with existing grants or kind of like government programs. I think the one thing that always rings to, and I love that Matthew brought this up, is how to be human. And ultimately, like ask your team kind of like if they have any other ideas where we can potentially have basically cost reduction. And also basically like talk to your clients as well, kind of like see what else do they need. Like, is your product kind of like still what they're paying for, especially when you're seeing churn. I think you can learn a lot like from those conversations. I recently had to churn a software company because like one, in terms of like ROI, it's not really where we thought it was going to be. So in the churn conversation, we talk about, hey, these are kind of the different data points and signals that I've been giving you in the last 6 months, and you didn't address any of it. So maybe there is kind of like something to that point as well, kind of like from you if you're on the receiving end of the churn. Like maybe it's time kind of like to jump in on those calls yourself versus relying kind of like on like essentially people who are like 2-3 layers removed to like answer those questions. That last one was like a slight deviation from just like general cost savings. But the silver lining would be if you pay a lot for software subscriptions, take a look at them and see what you can streamline.
I love it. All right. I'm going to go around the horn again. Denise, you're up next. And where would you say, let's reframe it and say optimizations, not decreased budgets. What areas would you like think optimizing makes the most sense when you're immediately cash strapped at a high growth phase?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's really going to vary on the situation. As a starting point, I would say really figuring out which projects are priorities and putting resources towards that, and then as well preventing employees from leaving. Like we talked a little bit about that, where if you've got some critical employees that will leave when you really need them, I would really prioritize making sure you're retaining your talent and making sure that everyone's on the same page in terms of timeline. And at the end of the day, we're all people. Your team's also going to be stressed. So I think having a good communication plan with that, checking in with your staff, and just making sure priorities are aligned across the board as well, so that you can optimize where your resources are going.
I love it. All right. Now I'm cognizant of the clock. Matthew, Ilya, I'm going to throw it to you guys for your take and also maybe some parting words for the folks in attendance.
Yeah, I would just say first thing is, you know, the book, I think it's like Great Leaders Eat Last or something like that. Which I totally just do your job first. Okay. You as a leader, go through your line items piece by piece, figure out what you can cut and show people that you're doing that. I remember when I went over what we were actually spending money on, kind of mid 2023, there was stuff in there that was very surprising to me. And I shared that with the team. I was like, talking openly with this. I talked to the team about this. I'm like, hey, does this make sense? And we cut a lot of money by actually going through it myself and actually talking to the team if it's required or not. You'll be amazed because people aren't looking at it through the same lens as you are. So like we cut like a lot of money by just line by line. Oh geez, I forgot about this one. Oh, we're doing this. Oh my goodness, like that's a lot. And that helped a lot. So I would say do that before you start looking at big picture. Oh, we're cutting the team and things like this. I'm not saying don't do that. I'm just saying line items first, dialogue, what's required, cut there first. That's it for me.
Awesome. Ilya, any wise parting words for the audience?
No, I think just when you're working through like trying to find funding and going through things, trying to save money, There's a kind of a concept called profit first that I've seen grow recently. And I think like, the idea is you have a bunch of bank accounts and one of them is your profit account and you pay that one first. And then if you're not able to cover the rest, then try and figure out what to do and change things. So yeah. And then another thing is if you're gonna have to do a layoff, do it sooner and deeper than you would like.
I appreciate that. It's going to be painful, but that's a great point, Ilya. Don't prolong the inevitable. If you know you have to make some sacrifices, do it quick. And also, one point from me to kind of put a cap on all of this too. Don't stop focusing on innovation. I think that that will be a killer, not just in driving market value, but in the opportunities for non-dilutive funding. I'm going to bring it back to Shred, but if you're continuing to invest in R&D, drive innovation that is going to make your solution ultimately more attractive to a customer base, you're also opening up the door for a virtuous cycle of reinvestment. You can get some of that money back from the government and then plug it into continuing innovation. If you're still innovating, if you're still solving something that someone else out there in the market isn't, you're going to find customers, and that's the best way to do it. It's not even just being penny wise and pound foolish. It is very much focusing on driving that unique differentiator. But I cannot thank you all enough for joining us today. This was fantastic. Everyone in attendance, it's been a pleasure. We will make sure to get the recording over to you and share any resources that we had. And I know that our webinar host is dropping everybody's LinkedIn into the chat here. So please connect, say hi, and reach out to anybody here on email, LinkedIn, all the above, and we will get back to you as needed. But thanks again, everybody.